Dave Pettit here with Season 2 of the Harvestaire Podcast Series. Our first interviewee, well, really needs no introduction. He's certainly been in the ag industry for a couple of decades. Could be why he's known in the industry as the god of the red harvester. It's a pleasure to welcome in Mr. Rod Gribble. How you going, Rod?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. I don't know about the God bit, anyway. I've been called other names.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty bits of what we're talking about, Rod, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Yeah, well, I've come from a farming family background, so I've sort of driven headers since I was probably about 10. After I left high school, I went to got a mechanics job in a dealership, and I sort of probably did headers most of the time there. When I finished that, I sort of went to the US and worked for a custom cutter for a year. Was with International 1460s in those days. Came back home and worked on the farm for another, since about 95. We've been on our own in a harvesting business and been doing that. And in the Australian Custom Harvesters Association, as president for a while, secretary for a fair few years, and then sort of always developed bits and pieces to try and make harvesters, more efficient and get more capacity out of them because, well, they're just an astronomical expense and you've just got to get the best out of them.
Absolutely. So then obviously there's, here in Australia, there's different brands of harvesters. Do you have a particular brand or model that you are an expertise more at? At
the moment, Case is the one that I've had for about the last 15 years, I suppose. Like Case and John Deere, they're made in North America. They're designed for corn and soybeans. And they have some shortfalls in our conditions in cereals, canola, and that's because our conditions are different to other places in the world. So, you've got to make some bits and pieces to make them work. But first you've got to find out and appreciate, well, what is the problem and what are you going to do about it? And so it's trying to work out those problem areas and then make something, see if that works or a little bit better.
So just having a little bit of a look back to last year, how different was it for you and for your customers?
Yeah, last year was a real battle for us over in the eastern states, mainly from about sort of halfway through New South Wales down. North of that, they had a very, very good year. But from sort of halfway down, we should have had a pretty good year, but there was a couple of nights in September that we got a horrendous frost, and that just buggered the whole show up very badly. So we had, big bulky crops with not much grain in them, and that's very difficult to handle. And also the crops some of them were a bit green in the stalk because the crop was still trying to push out ahead and things like that, even though it had been hammered, and it was still trying to do that. And very, very difficult though stuff. But up north, Moree, Gundawindi, all through that, they had really, really good year, whereas previous year they had a terrible one. And the same in the west. Around Jarrow and things like that, they had an exceptional year up there, whereas the previous year was a terrible one, shocker. Yeah, no, it's great varied conditions, right across the country, and it is a challenge for all machines, and so just got to try and work out, well, how can you make them go better in these tough conditions, so to speak.
Absolutely. So in that sense then, you guys have been doing extensive testing for last year. Why was that?
Over the years, I've made bits and pieces and tried bits and pieces, and these concaves that I've come up with and the separation modules, they've been sort of years in the development and making, and I thought they worked pretty damn well. And then eventually, I sold a few some other people, and I was doing a workshop for a Curie, and one of the blokes, I'm pretty sure it was there, he said, there's a whole lot of these different concaves, but no one's got any data to say that, this has got improved capacity by X amount over standard. And I thought that was a very valid question to ask because there's a big mob of aftermarket concaves available to purchase, and they all claim all sorts of benefits. And these may be true, but in reality, there's very little in the way of supporting data. So myself and Harvestaire, and Harvestaire did most of it, set out to try and to try and get some data, and it's certainly not easy to do that. And so we tried to got the best we could with the gear that we had, whilst mostly getting covered in dirt and dust and chaff and stuff. It's not an easy job to do that. And like the major manufacturers, they've got these test machines, they call them, and it's basically nearly bolted on the back of the machine they're testing, and that does a huge amount of analysis on that machine. But we haven't got that, facility. So it's mainly, lost trays and keeping an idea and taking notes of all the conditions, what you're trying to do, and trying to get some workable data to show people to say, well, under these conditions on this day, this is what it did on comparison with this machine over here. It's not easy because there's just so many variables. You can go from one paddock to the other in the same variety of wheat, and it's just totally different. So that's just what it is. And so the only thing you can do is say, well, this machine performed like this on this particular day against this one in this particular crop, and these were the weather conditions and what happened.
So along with that, and you're talking about like having to work with different variables, weather conditions, things like that. Would each state also be a variable in a sense of different dirt conditions and once again weather conditions, things like that?
Yeah. No, they're all very different. Like even in WA, like it's down south, it's like they often have that coastal effect sometimes, and but up north it's usually hot as and dry, and in the middle it's probably in the middle of those ones. Whether it rains or not, well, there's not much you can do about that, but that just happens. But there's just different conditions, and also probably different varieties from north to south as well. Same as what we have here. Like up north, more Igundawindi, things like that, they often have summer storms up there, like that, October, November, December storms and that. And, that can play havoc up there sometimes. There's a few people we do the testing with, sort of longer-term people that are interested in doing this, and there's also some new ones. Anyone that buys, new concaves, I want to know, well, what do you think of them? Do they work, or what do you think? Because I'm in the contracting game, there's contractors that, they work in lots of different conditions, from central Queensland down to, mid-New South Wales, or from central Queensland to the bottom of Victoria, and even right down to, bottom of South Australia and things like that. And so it's good to work with those type of people who they do a wide variety of crops, but they've also got a let's say a wide variety of skill sets in the cab, because not everyone's an expert. And so, there's a few areas that you've got to, take into consideration for that. But, yeah, no, they work. Also, last year we did took a real particular interest. Brendan Cups from up just south of Gero, he does all mechanical works and things like that, and he fixes headers and things like that. And him and I at Harvestaire were working with him, and he was working on this client's header. It was a 8230, I think it was. It was pretty tired because, as I said, the previous year they had really bad conditions, so they didn't spend much money on the machine. They just wanted to get it through harvest. But anyway, before the 24 harvest, they had to basically fix it right up. So they fixed it right up, did everything there, put concaves and sieves and you name it, the whole box and dies, because it needed it. It was tired. Brendan fixed up the other machine. I think it was an 8230 as well. And so it was up to spec, but it didn't have my concaves and separation module thing and things like that. And so those sorts of things were very good comparisons when you've got two machines in the same paddock, in the same conditions. And in those sort of places, you've got nearly, there's sort of no difference in the operators, because they're, they're probably a family partnership, so to speak, and they're one operator's probably as good as the other. So you're just testing the gear.
Absolutely. So who was the main test customers that you used?
Well, what's his name? Brendan Cuffs had his bloke up north, and then there was Roden Bagley, they're in the middle of there somewhere. And then I think the Lester brothers were down South, they had some gear, and they provided us, good feedback. And then there's also the new customers, and I sort of kept in touch with most of them as I could, just to find out what they thought. Yeah, so it just was interesting that between the good harvesting conditions up north in New South Wales and in around Jarrow and things like that, compared to other areas like where we were down south, was that frosted, horrible stuff, and that's really hard on the machine. But it's still good to compare, with my so-called concaves and separation modules as against another one in good conditions and in really hard conditions, because any machine can work pretty well in good conditions. It's just when you get those tough things or a little bit, I don't know, away from the good conditions or the variety or things like that, sort of sets things apart. And then you've got to have an understanding about what the problem is and understand the limitations, and then set it up for those conditions, because you'll often hear, and people think it's an excuse, but the major machinery dealership people say, well, it's conditions and conditions and conditions. They play a huge part in the machinery efficiency, and they're right. It's exactly what it does. But you've just got to acknowledge what are the conditions, understand, well, this is what I can do, and maybe that's all the machine can do. Especially in these frosted conditions, that's all it can do. It can't do any better than that. And then you just have to set the machine up for that, and that really what sets operators apart. For people who understand what's happening, and that goes for the same with machines with automation on them as well, because even though they've got automation, you've really got to understand, well, what is that machine trying to do under the parameters you've set for it? You've still got to use a brain to try and work out, well, okay, yep, this machine is doing this, but maybe that's just the best it can do in those conditions.
So is automation something that's just now coming through, or has it been coming through for the last, say, 5-10 years?
Yeah, probably 5 years or so. And the software gets better and better all the time. Like, it absolutely does work, and I can speak from a case in New Holland. That absolutely does work, but you've just got to understand what the machine is doing under the parameters that you've set for it.
So, Rod, what would you think was the biggest thing you learned last year then?
Oh, yeah, frost is a real bastard to handle, and really tough on the machines. But, in saying that, like, I had a lot of people ring me up last year because it was tough conditions. And so my concaves and the separation modules and the machine that was set up properly, it was working much, much better in those conditions. Still very, very tough and very trying, but it was working much better than other machines. Like, I had a bloke, they had their 7250 all set up with my gear and canola. Like, it was big, bulky canola, but it was frosted. It was really hard. And so they were doing about 12 tonne an hour out of it. And he had another crowd in there, and they had about 4 of the same type machine, 7250s, all automation, and they didn't have anything set up in mine, and they were sort of doing 6 and 8 tonne an hour in the same conditions. Okay, so you can put some of that down to skill set of the operators, but concaves and separation modules and the whole setup, it makes a lot of difference to them. So it's good to see that they work in a wide variety of crops and a wide variety of conditions.
Absolutely. So you use your own gear. How did you find it went with last year compared to the previous year before that?
Yeah, no, it all worked fine. But like I said, it was really, really tough in our conditions, but it worked fine. There's much better than the other ones, and there's plenty of people around in our area, like in 100 k's, 150 k's north to 400 k's south, wasn't very good conditions, and they were much, much better than previous ones. Yep, no, you don't really want to go through too many of those years where it's really big crops but not much grain in them. It's very hard on the machine, that sort of stuff.
So now there's plenty of farmers out there that by now have been running your solutions for a few years. Have you had any feedback at all from them?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've got to ring them up because they don't ring me up. And I put it this way, I've never had anyone that say, these things don't work. So I ring them up to see how they're going and things like that, and if they need help with tweaking or things like that. But also I try and find other ones that they may be working with another like machine in the same crop. Because I just want to know, does it make X amount of difference to them in those same machines, same conditions? It was an interesting one. I did some work with people that've got a S790. They've got two of them, and both 18-metre Midwests on them. And they had, tough conditions like up. It was frosted. And they just had basically drivers on them. At the end of probably about a month after harvest, I rang up the owner and I said, well, what do you think? And he looked at all the data because he can look it through that JD link or something it's called. And he said, yep, that definitely made a difference to him. And so he's ordered a whole set for this coming harvest. And there's things like, Brendan was obviously another one up near Gero. Like I said, he started with a machine that needed a lot of loving. And then we added all the improvements and guided him through the setup and the calibrations. And it was a real good case study, I suppose, to say what you can achieve out of a good setup, and advice and get the right parts and, just help them all through the way and just trying to understand what's happening with the machine and in comparison to another one. And it made a big, big difference to that machine, which is great. Another guy, Joel Pimer from down near Horsham in Victoria, he's got a 7250. He got the complete kit last year, but it was late in the year because they had a very wet harvest last year, and it made their machine much, much better than what it was before. Anyway, he just said, look, I can't wait to get into a dry year, a normal year, so to speak. Harvest 24 came along, and then it was a dry spring for them. But they had some pretty good crops, good yielding crops and things. So I was just speaking to Joel to see how he was going and with it, and he said, oh, no, she goes like a rocket, that thing now. And it was particularly interesting because a friend of mine who's got an S680, and this bloke knows what he's doing with it because he's got it tweaked up with concaves and rotary elements and all the rest of it. And he was down there helping him in barley and some wheat. And anyway, Ian told me that he said that 7250 was running rings around that 680, and he couldn't get any more out of that 680. But he said that 7250 was just, like I said, it was running rings around it. So Joel was very happy with the machine. He said power was his limit. He just ran out of power all the time, which, okay, that's just one of those things. Another guy from South Australia, Derek Barnes, he's got a couple of 8240s. He had one with eventually the full setup. He started off in chickpeas up in Queensland, and he didn't have the separation modules in for a start, but he got them in after about, I think it was about a week. And anyway, he said there was a noticeable difference with rotor loss in that because chickpeas can have, well, they desiccate them, but the seed can be dry, but the vine can be ropey and a bit green, and so that creates its own issues. Then he moved into wheat into northern New South Wales, something like Collareneborough, I think it was. And he had both machines, but only one had the full setup in it. And he said it was just chalk and cheese between them. It made a lot of difference to them. Yeah, I probably can't use the words what Derek described them as was going like, but safe to say it was going pretty good. In the last few weeks, he's been back up there. He did sorghum again, and sorghum is one of those things they've got to spray it off, and it's got a big leaf on it, and like the grain can be dry, but the sorghum leaf can be still a bit green sometimes, and that's hard to separate grain. It's all right when it all dries off. And he was working with another machine, the same type machine, 8240, I think it was, and he said it was way better with what he's got in it, and my gear he's got in it, and than the other one. And so Derek's, he's good to that. He gives me, just straightforward feedback, and that's what you went to now. And there's no airs or graces. It's just, like I said before, he said, no, she works good. Damien Talbot, he's around Dubbo. He's got a 9240. Now, he got concaves last year, and he said it made a lot of difference, that machine, particularly in barley. He says it was a totally different machine. 24 for harvest, he got some separation modules in. He ran them in canola and cereals, and he was up north, and he was down around Narromine, Trangie area through there, and now Sparrow doesn't say too much, but he called me up during harvest, and he said he was just really impressed with what the package did. It just totally made that machine just a totally different machine. So it's good to hear all that stuff from so-called good harvesting conditions to hard, tough harvesting conditions, that they all certainly helped people with them.
Would that be the reason why you use contract harvesters along with Harvestaire for the testing, so that you get the proper feedback? Yeah, look,
they do a lot of different, let's just say different crops and things like that, and a lot of different conditions and things like that. And so, you're getting a very wide, probably scope of conditions and crops, and that gives really good information about, how does it work in that crop in those conditions. And so they're really good people to deal with, to try and get some of that information out of them. And also, if a contractor's running a fleet of machines, well, I think most of them buy Panadol by the wheelbarrow full sometimes, but, there's a whole lot of skilled staff levels that are all different, and, and all machines break down all the time and things like that. But if you've got a machine that's all set up with concaves that thrash and separation modules that, they separate, along with the basics of the machine all adjusted and calibrated properly, well, that makes the life of the contract harvester, the owner of the business, makes their life a lot less stressed, which, that's good to hear. As Matt Burke, who runs, God knows, I think he runs 10 or 12 machines or something. Yeah, he gets the stuff and he puts it in all the time, and he said it just works. He puts it in there and he just knows it works, which is good.
So contract harvesting, it's obviously always been around the place. Is it becoming more and more popular, or is it starting to drift off a little bit?
That's a good question. Yeah. It's always been around. And look, it'll probably be around in the future, but the machines are getting so expensive now. Like mine's an 8250 chrome. If you want to buy a new one of those, like it's a four-wheel drive, all that sort of stuff in it, there's not a lot of change out of $1 million just for the machine alone. And then if you want to step up to the next league, like a CR10 or a AF9 or that sort of level, X9s or things like that, they're 1.2 just for the machine, and then you've got to put a front on them, and that size front is $400,000.
Yeah.
So, you're, $1.6, $1.7 million for a big capacity machine. That's, that takes a lot of paying off. The insurances on that is horrendous. That cost per hour is, well in excess of $2,000 an hour.
Yeah.
You've got to charge some people. Now, I reckon if I had said that to some of the growers, I'd probably have to take a defibrillator there, because they'd be flat on their back on the ground. You have to kick-start them again. But that's just the reality of it. And, okay, that's, it's a lot of money. Now, the theory is that some of these big machines can replace two. Now, that may be optimistic, probably 1.5 to 1.6 or 7 machines. But you've got to have a good operator on them, and you've got to have all the facilities running behind that machine at top notch to make that machine run at, try and get it down to 100% capacity all the time. I know that's nearly impossible, but to try and give that opportunities, because that machine just cannot stop, because, that, like I said, they're very, very expensive. So is contracting going to be around in the future? Yeah, probably, but it's just going to get more expensive. And same for the growers. They don't buy the machines any cheaper than us, and they probably do less hours in them. So, their costs of harvest are just going up as well. So what needs to happen is grain prices need to go up. because otherwise, they can't do it. It's just as simple as that. Harvest it's only happened once a year, so you've got to try and get the most of it, and because the margins for everyone are very tight. Nature of the beast, I'd say.
Absolutely. Well, before I let you go, I know you're a busy man. Anything else you'd like the listeners to know about?
We're going to, in conjunction with Harvestaire, we're doing more and more concaves for this coming season and separation modules. And so if people are interested and want some more information, just give me a call or get in touch with Harvestaire and they can steer in the right direction, which is probably me anyway.
Absolutely. It's the best way to get the information straight from the horse's mouth, as they say. Thank you so much.
And I can put them on to people. If they want to know, so I can put them on to people that used it and just say, look, call Tommy Smith or whatever and just ask them, see what you reckon. And they'll tell you straight. There's no point beating around the bush. They'll just tell you straight.
Absolutely. It's always good to get someone else's opinion as well, and someone else that's tried it and it's worked for them. They've got different opinions about things, so...
Yep, that's right, yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rod. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yep, no worries, mate. Thanks for that. We'll catch you.
That was harvesting contractor Rod Gribble. You've been listening to Dave Pettit on Season 2 of the Harvestaire Podcast Series.